Hello, this is Frank Gaffney. I'm delighted to be bringing you the big picture about North Korea with one of the countries, our countries, and the world's most, I think, tenacious and extraordinarily impactful freedom fighters. Her name is Dr. Suzanne Scholte. We've been speaking with her a little bit in a previous segment about the plight of the people of North Korea at the hands of one of the most odious regimes in history, namely that of Kim Jong-un and the Kim dynasty before him. We're going to talk now in a little bit more detail about what Suzanne Scholte and her colleagues are doing to try to alleviate the suffering most immediately of the North Korean people and to effect change on the Korean Peninsula in the right way. Suzanne, again, thank you for giving us extensive opportunities to really tease out what we are confronting in the form of horrific, inhumane conduct by the government of North Korea and the various ways in which it is being accommodated and enabled and sustained when that's not in anyone's interest, I think, truthfully. One of the things that you touched on when we spoke earlier, but that I think we need to examine more closely, is this effort that you and many of your colleagues have been making, defectors and others, to bring information to the North Korean people about what they're missing, what they're entitled to enjoy in terms of freedom. Talk about the Free North Korea radio effort as a particularly important contributor to all that.
Sure. I believe it. All methods need to be used to get information in. So the defectors used to argue about balloon launches are more important, or rice bottles are the way to go, radio is the way to go, but they're all important because the balloons, all the above. Balloons are going to get to your, southern North Korea. The rice bottles are going to reach the shorelines. Radio can be heard by everyone. Our radio station can be heard by everyone, but how many people have radios? That how many people have a shortwave radio where they can turn it on? We know all the elites are listening. We know that, but we want to reach everybody. So the power of information is so critical, and it's interesting. You can always tell what has the most impact by how the regime responds. So the regime demanded, one of the first things the regime demanded of the Moon administration was to turn off the loudspeakers at the DMZ. This is an interesting statistic, but 70% of North Korea's ground forces and 50% of its air and naval forces are near the DMZ and had access to those.
Forward deployed, as they say.
Exactly, yeah.
So,
and they
so
had
as
access
to enable
to
them to mount at any time an attack against South Korea.
But that meant the loudspeakers, South Korea was broadcasting information to the North Korean people, and it was a powerful tool, and that's why they demand they get shut down.
Because those soldiers would at some point go home.
Exactly.
And tell them
they would
what
hear
they'd
it,
heard.
and they would go home. Word of mouth is incredible in the spreading of information in North Korea. So our radio program is broadcast every morning and every evening. It's an incredible program. It is a unique partnership between freedom-loving Americans that finance 100% of the transmission.
No South Korean government or private
government. No government is involved in this. It's all American citizens and North Korean escapees who create the program. And we repeatedly ranked the highest rated program. When you interviewed escapees, what did you listen to back in North Korea? Our program outbursts everyone among North Korean listeners. And just last month, we got ranked the #1 website of all the media entities. We outperform people who have budgets that are 14 times greater than ours. I mean, we are just a fraction.
The U.S. government comes to mind.
Yeah,
I think,
right? We outperform, and I love Radio Free Asia. I love Voice of America. I love KBS, SBS. I want everybody to broadcast in North Korea. I want them to have as much information as possible. But our little Free North Korea radio, backed by Americans, freedom-loving Americans, is
private philanthropy.
Private philanthropy is outperforming everybody, and I believe it's because there's nothing more powerful than people North Koreans living in freedom, reaching out to their brothers and sisters. There's nothing more powerful than North Koreans living in freedom, reaching out to the North Koreans who are enslaved.
Telling them what it's like, telling them how they are entitled to it, and the necessity of ending the regime that denies them
Right.
And Suzanne, I'm reminded as an old Cold Warrior myself, as you were, of the way in which defectors in the day from the Soviet bloc mounted things like Radio Liberty and Radio Free Europe, and the testimonials that we've received from people like Natan Sharansky, for example, of the impact that those broadcasts had. People gathering, covertly to listen to freedom, and how important it was to inspiring ultimately what came about in terms of the end of the Soviet Union, with Ronald Reagan's help, of course, and ours. But that's as true today.
Absolutely.
And what you're describing is an opportunity that has arisen. And one of the things that I just wanted to discuss with you, because it I think, is both shocking and would come as a great surprise to most Americans, that a man who presides over one of what we call a key ally in North Asia, namely Moon Jae-in, president of South Korea, is actually part of the problem at the moment. Not only part of the problem in terms of interposing obstacles to the kind of flow of information that you're talking about, but as I understand it, mistreating, maybe, is the word for some of these defectors, and certainly emboldening the North Korean regime to think that they're going to be able to, once again, play the South to provide support and perpetuate this horrific regime in the North.
Yeah. The most important thing we can do is to give the people in the regime a way out. If you're an elite in North Korea, you wake up every morning and you only have two choices: loyalty to Kim Jong-un or seeing your family killed and tortured in front of you before you're killed. That's what they see. Those are their only choices. We have to say, no, there's a third choice. And we have to talk about the human rights and the freedoms that they're entitled to as human beings, and that's what we want for them. What America wants for them is freedom. And unfortunately, the president of South Korea has more interest in serving the Kim regime than he does in helping the North Korean people. And I want to tell you, we have a couple, I'm going to comment about the thing you talk about, the Cold War. Two people that working and contributing programming to Free North Korea, one of them said he started listening to Free North Korea radio, and he said 3 nights of listening to radio just completely erased all the decades of propaganda. He said the regime is built on sand.
Yes.
And it's going to wash away with the truth. We have a young woman who's also helping on programming. She and her father, as you talked about huddling, they would huddle secretly together, and the father and daughter would listen to Free North Korea radio, listen to radio broadcasting. So anyway, this is what the Moon government is intent on stopping all of this. So they've actually...
Because the North is demanding that this be stopped.
Because the North is demanding it, because the information is having so much power. And the Moon government has been complying with these requests. And it's shocking. It's shocking. How
is that power expressed in a totalitarian police state like the North? Is it just more people fleeing, or is it the markets becoming kind of a fulcrum for more systemic change? I mean, how do you see that power becoming a problem for the regime? Yeah,
I think that the people are much more informed. They're surviving because of the market system. They're realizing that the source of their misery is the regime. That's what we need to communicate to them. The source of your misery isn't the Yankee imperialist wolves that they're brainwashed to hate from childhood. The source of your misery is Kim Jong-un and that dictatorship. And we need to be communicating that.
And again, those defectors who are living in freedom and are able to see this very clearly,
right,
and the alternative.
And I absolutely believe this is going to be like a Romania situation, where if they saw another way forward, if there was something they could get behind, some option they'd arrest Kim Jong-un and hang him up by his heels. But we're not giving them an option because we're cutting off the sources of information that are coming in. That the Moon government ripped the loudspeaker. Didn't even just turn them off. They ripped the loudspeakers off the DMZ at the request of the regime. So,
and again, I want to come back to that in a moment. But just an aside, we had a fascinating conversation with one of your colleagues, Greg Scarlett, about that Romanian experience. And how it attests to how quickly these things can happen. We're told that it's impossible, that the Kim dynasty is something that will always rule in the North and the people are doomed to the fate of being oppressed by it. It's not so.
Right.
It doesn't have to be that way. And so the Moon government must be held accountable, it seems to me, for this misconduct. It's not in the interests of the people of South Korea, especially, and I want to get your thoughts on this, Suzanne. I mean, you're a close student of this, and you're watching and documenting really so much of what's going on the Korean Peninsula. But is it right to say that Moon is actually prepared for a unification with the North, more or less on the terms of Kim Jong-un and his regime? And what would that mean for the people of South Korea were it to happen?
I do not understand what Moon Jae-in is trying to do. He is either lives in the fanciful world that that you can have peaceful coexistence and then just move forward with peaceful coexistence, or he absolutely wants to turn the Korea under the Baktu, which is the Kim Jong-un's dynasty, the Baktu Mountain line, that he's actually pro that regime. It's frightening.
And there's a lot of evidence that
yes,
that's the case. I mean, he and many of his senior subordinates have really got a Marxist sort of alignment, it seems.
It's frightening. It's hard for us to contemplate that because we see South Korea as this incredible country that's just so prosperous that you would have that mindset. But that appears to be his mindset.
Fundamentally pro-Western now, with a functioning democracy.
Absolutely. But people, our South Korean friends and the North Korean defectors have been warning us about this. And it's I think a lot of Americans
because they're seeing the symptoms.
They're seeing it. Yeah.
The North's.
There's this idea that they would have this confederation. And the idea would be that they would have elect a future government that had this confederation, which would mean that the North would completely take over the South. It's truly frightening, and I do not know, except that I think that Moon Jae-in is a Juche religionist, Juche being the religion of North Korea.
Wow.
And I think he's a Juche ideologue, and he's not
a fellow traveler at the very least.
Exactly. He's not doing anything to preserve South Korea's republic. He's actually undermining South Korea's republic. He's shutting down churches. He is shutting down freedom of speech.
Journalism.
And it's absolutely frightening what he's doing in South Korea to undermine their civil liberties. And this is something that's been of concern to Democrats and Republicans in our Congress who care about civil liberties. They've actually had a hearing on it, and they're going to be having another one too.
Well, this brings me to the Congress because what is very concerning, and I think, again, most of Americans don't have any idea of this, is that we're witnessing the influence operations of the United Front Department in North Korea, not only subverting, seemingly with the connivance of the government there, South Korea, but actually trying to subvert U.S. policy towards the Korean situation. There is this piece of legislation, as you know, its bill number in the House is H.R. 3446, the Peace on the Korean Peninsula Act, it's called. Its lead sponsor is somebody I know you know well, Congressman Brad Sherman from California. And it's been described as essentially a formula for likely precipitating, if not the takeover of South Korea with the connivance, as I say, of the government there by the North, then perhaps the next Korean War. Talk a little bit about this legislation and whether that's overstating the implications of it.
It's not. This is a concoction from the pit of hell because it seems completely innocent.
Well, talk about what it does.
Well, the
first.
war, it's an end of war declaration, and it seems innocent because why not have an end of war declaration? 1953, the war ended. It's a ceasefire right now. Why do we need to continue with the ceasefire? Why don't we have an end of war declaration? Well, this is a concoction from the regime to try to undermine South Korea. And it looks innocent. And Brad Sherman cares about North Korea human rights. And we're appealing to him to withdraw this.
You've actually witnessed how deeply he cares about
Oh, yeah. He
rights.
hosted an event with some of the people that are doing those very projects, the balloon launches, the radio broadcasting. He hosted a roundtable with members of Congress, and he was so...
And sent messages to the North.
And he sent
through
messages in support of the North Korean people. So I think he cares very much about the North Korean people. And I think he got sold. I think he's been manipulated in a cynical way because he cares about the North Korean people to say, well, this would really help the North Korean people. No, it's not. It's going to not do nothing to help the North Korean people. It's going to undermine the South Korean people. And here's why. The moment the ink is dry on the end of war declaration, you will see the pro-North Koreans forces and activists in South Korea show up at all the American bases. Yankee, go home. Go home, Yankee imperialists.
No longer needed.
No longer needed. And what I'm the mom of 2 Army sons. What American mom or dad is going to want their daughter or their son serving in a country that's going to be protesting? And remember, a couple things. THAAD, they're still protesting against THAAD.
That's
and
the
that
theater high-altitude air defense.
And what is that? That's purely a defense if North Korea should threaten South Korea. It's purely,
or China. Yeah.
It's purely for South Korea's defense. How can you be against something that's simply to defend the country and keep it safe? Well, they're still protesting against that.
And Moon actually shut
harassing
it down
Yeah,
and said we won't bring in any more batteries of it.
So this would happen. You'd have these big protests, and there would be this pressure. And remember, we talked about withdrawing under Jimmy Carter. We talked about pulling out under Bush. Rumsfeld, right? Rumsfeld was like, well, if you guys don't want us there, maybe we'll just go home.
Right.
And that's what's going to happen. So we withdraw. That's the end of South Korea.
Under the Biden administration, needless to say.
Well, yes.
And
so that's the concern, and that's how that would play out.
And the trouble, again, is that would be very much the attitude of the Moon government as well, is not just let's get those Americans out of here, but let's essentially back away, I think, from the alliance. And how will that be perceived? You know the North Korean government as well as anybody, Suzanne Scholte. What would the likely response of the North be to the exit of Americans and the undermining, really, of South Korea's defense posture?
Well,
as a result?
North Korea's goal has always been to unite the Korean Peninsula under the Kim Jong-un, under the Kim regime. They want to take over South Korea. They have never not stated that. Yeah. They've never changed their views. That's always been the plan.
In their position.
And they will also never give up their nuclear weapons. And they just, that's just a manipulation. The nuclear threat, the nuclear tests are all to pull your eyes away from the horrible things they're doing to their own people.
The proverbial shiny dangling object.
Exactly.
Look over there, folks, instead of here.
They are,
and accommodate, by the way.
Yes.
I mean, that's the other thing, is it's leverage to extract more concessions from the West, either with their Chinese partners playing the middleman or, direct negotiations.
And one thing you can always know, you can take this to the bank. The Kim regime will never make a decision for the benefit of the North Korean people. They only decide what benefits Kim Jong-un. And unfortunately, that's how the Republic of Korea's president is behaving. Yeah. All the decisions are meant to benefit the Kim dynasty.
And the people of South Korea take the hindmost in this circumstance, needless to say, especially if it does precipitate another horrific war, which the North Koreans are poised to go at. We talked about it any moment. So, Suzanne, let's wrap this up by talking a bit about what should our policy be if it's not going to be going down this primrose path of a peace declaration or a peace treaty, which might flow from it, for that matter, on essentially, again, North Korea's terms?
Yeah, I think
what do you recommend?
That legislation's got to be stopped. The whole idea of this peace declaration has got to be stopped. It's got to be stopped. It's been the DOD spokesman brought it up recently that they were open to this idea. It's got to be stopped. People have got to be awakened in our government, in our Congress, about where this is going, because it's not innocuous. It's going to be horrible. So we've got to stop that. We've got to help save these refugees because they've got so much more information we can learn about what's going on in North Korea, because they're people that escaped in the last couple of years.
And refugees, you mean these defectors or
the ones that are in China? Yeah, the ones that are in China right now. And then we never, ever, ever sideline the human rights issue again. Because if we want to show people the way forward in North Korea, the mistake that we always make is when we focus on the nuclear issue, we feed the lie. I think that's probably the worst thing. We feed the lie that we don't care about the people in North Korea. We only care about the damage they could do to us through their nuclear program. If we only focus on the nuclear program, and we're getting ready to do that again. And it's just a manipulation. So we've got to keep human rights on the forefront. I mean, right now we could be saying, your dictator's talking about another arduous march. Kim Jong-un,
arduous march?
Arduous march. Arduous march.
Which brought about the regime in the first place.
The million of people that died, and that's what brought about the opening up, the information coming in and everything. But that Kim Jong-un is warning about that. Well, under Kim Jong-il, this has got to be communicated to the people of North Korea. During the famine, 3 million people died. Not a single person needed to die. There was enough humanitarian aid provided by the World Food Program, the United States of America, Japan, South Korea, so much aid. Nobody needed to die. But Kim Jong-il used that food aid as a weapon against his own people while he continued to develop the nuclear program. We need to be communicating that to people of North Korea right now. Kim Jong-un's warning about this. We are ready to help you. We are ready to send in humanitarian aid, medical aid, but we want to make sure we're there to make sure it gets to the intended recipients. We should be communicating that to people in North Korea because we know they're in desperate situation.
Can you do that as a practical matter with a government like Kim's?
You'd have to insist that your humanitarian people, those World Food trucks, those World Food Program trucks, they don't leave the town. They make sure that Lee family eats that rice. They make sure those children in that orphanage get that food. I got to tell you a quick story about that. During the last famine, there was a humanitarian worker that said he went into an orphanage and he handed out cookies to all the kids, and the children just sat there with the cookies like this because they knew as soon as he left the room, they were going to take the cookies away. And you hear the stories from the defectors and the humanitarian workers. So we have to communicate that.
Imagine what's going through their minds as they're likely starving.
Yeah, it's
here's something delicious, no less. But
but this whole manipulation, you hear these stories again and again. So, but that's what we have to communicate to people in North Korea, that we want to help you. We care about you, but we want to make sure that if humanitarian aid goes, that we're going to be there. But we could be forecasting that. We could be telling people in North Korea that, and I think it's so important to do that. And I believe. We talk about the complete, reversible, verifiable dismantlement of the nuclear program. I think it should be CVIF, the complete dismantlement, irreversible freedom. The freedom is what we want for people in North Korea, and we should be talking about that, and we should be doing everything we can, especially right now, support the work of the defectors. Get them the financial resources they need so they can do balloon launches, so we can do the radio broadcast, partner with them. We've got
and how can people support you in your work with them to get these radio shows?
Well, they can go to our website, Defense Forum Foundation, and you can see about all the different programs that we're doing. We also have a website just for Free North Korea Radio that people are interested in Free North Korea Radio.
And what's that website?
And through our North Korea Freedom Coalition, we bring partners together. For example, we have a wonderful man whose father was a Holocaust survivor who orphaned because of the Holocaust. He has a passion for orphans. So we connected him with a Korean missionary who's working with North Korean orphans. We have a woman who's got a passion for spreading the gospel. She's helping support the rice bottle launches. The Defense Forum Foundation, my foundation, we have a passion for information, so we're financing Free North Korea Radio. So we like to bring people together to help support the defectors, especially right now because there's another election coming up in South Korea where things could change. But we've got to help them right now.
Critical. All right, and that's a story for another day. But Suzanne Scholte, just give us the websites that you want people to go to. The DefenseForumFoundation.org is the first, and the North Korean Radio.
Free North Korea Radio.
You can get to it through
Defense Forum Foundation. Yeah, you can link it through it. So.
Suzanne, you have deservedly won the Seoul Peace Prize Laureate distinction, a Nobel Peace Prize nomination. Your work is incalculably important. I'm so proud of you and our friendship, and I look forward to talking with you further about what you're doing, what still needs to be done, and how we can help.
Thank you.
I hope you'll be tuning in for all of that in the near future. Thank you for listening.